The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners on Saga 960 AM and those of you listening around the world on streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. Thanks for all the kind words from those of you who have been enjoying the show the last few weeks. I'm glad you're finding this useful. Tonight, we're talking about practical tips for positive thinking, and an hour goes by fast. So we're going to jump right into the questions. Last week, we talked about bullying, and I got another question along those lines. So this new question is from Isaac about recovering from workplace bullying. Hey, Leanna, I come from an abusive, harsh work environment. I was hassled by a superior and afraid of making mistakes and getting punished. How do I deal with the fear and paranoia of the pattern repeating in a new job? Thanks for your question, Isaac. Regaining a positive attitude after a legitimately negative experience is, to put it lightly, challenging. A lot of people think they just need to put the negatives out of their minds, but that's not how it works. If it was that easy, everyone would do it, right? For a lot of people, the thoughts that they resist are the ones that become stronger. So it's not about packing those negative emotions down. It's about processing them. Don't fight them, feel them. And that's where my top 10 saying about positivity comes from. Ignoring negatives isn't being positive. You've probably heard the phrase, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Now, when I hear this saying in my head, I think of it in the voice of Vas, the villain from, one of the villains from Far Cry 3. This is a video game reference. If you don't understand it, that's okay. It just makes me happy. But that whole insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's what happens when you ignore negatives. You just do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. You don't learn from those bad experiences. Truly positive, resilient people use negative experiences to learn, to grow, and to build empathy. The goal is to feel like the world makes sense again after a bad experience like Isaac has had. To take lessons from bad experiences instead of just walking away traumatized, to regain that sense of control that abuse causes you to lose. So, Isaac, don't just pack down that fear. Acknowledge that you feel afraid. And in quiet moments, when you can, explore why. So you can learn how to soothe and process that fear. I can't tell you how to do it in this format. This is a radio show. We're not talking. And this is a process that can take a while and isn't necessarily linear. The thing is, Isaac, you do deserve to take that journey on your own terms. And oh my God, this isn't just me spewing platitudes, okay? I worked in the TV industry. Talk about abusive workplaces. After my experiences there, what I decided to do was make that behavior that I was at the mercy of lessons about what not to do. Those bad memories are motivations when I feel like I'm losing my cool to take a moment. Because the last thing I want is to end up acting like that guy. Guy is not the word I wanted to use there. The word I want to use can't be said on radio. That's another one of my own top 10 bits of advice that I take in those moments. Don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Isaac, just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it'll happen again. That pattern, and you use the word punishment, that pattern of punishing mistakes, that didn't come from you. That came from the bad boss or bosses. But it's hard to really internalize that message. It's hard to feel like it's true when this kind of thing happens again and again in someone's life, possibly going back to abusive teachers and parents. I don't know the full case history. I am not a therapist, but Isaac, if self-blame is at the root of your fear. A part of you might feel like you deserved the bad treatment. Now, right there, that's a mistake you might be making that you can control and stop. Here's the real deal. Consequences and punishments aren't the same things. They're actually very different and exist in very different worlds. Consequences exist in a paradigm of accountability. Consequences feel fair, even if they don't feel good. Punishment, on the other hand, is proof that someone has power over you. Punishment is something parents do to children. Punishment is something that the legal system does to people that have been convicted of breaking the law. There are other places that punishment exists, but it's always a higher power using that power to maintain order in some way, okay? Accountability is a state of owning your actions in a centered, confident place. That's why those consequences, even though they suck, even though you don't like them, feel fair, or at least in the realm of fairness. At least you can see something to them. The word punishment that you used, Isaac, indicates a power imbalance. And that power imbalance is where don't ignore the negatives comes in. If you ignore your negative experiences here, you miss that important distinction and a chance to learn from your experiences. So here's a positive potential learning experience here. I'm not saying this is the only one. I'm not saying it's the right one. It's just an example of how you can take away a positive learning experience from a legitimately bad circumstance. Workplace bullying is awful. You have the opportunity here to really define the distinction between consequences and punishment, so you can know in future whether your current or future workplace is abusive. In a workplace where you're not being bullied, you have the opportunity to understand what's happening. Maybe not right away, but there is time at some point to discuss what happened. So you can really understand why decisions are being made. You may not agree with these decisions. You may not like the decisions, but you should understand where your supervisors, or company is coming from. Accountability in adults in a properly run workplace should never feel like unfair punishment. Freudian slip on the floor there. Adults don't punish other adults, okay? Not in a relationship of equals, or even a relationship of a professional power hierarchy. Accountability, consequences, punishment, something out of whack. If that's how it's feeling, Isaac, like you're being punished, then the workplace is likely legitimately not fair. But there's another part of you I want to address here, because it's very real and it's going to feel judgy. It may sting at first, but hear me out, okay? The other thing that might be going on here is that part of you in those moments where you feel punished isn't entirely a grown-up. Like I said, hear me out. That may sound really harsh. Hear me out. It's not. No one is perfectly mature. Nobody. Top 10 saying, nobody's perfect. Stop trying to be perfect, right? In life, as we go along, there are times that parts of our soul just get beaten up. When that happens, especially in childhood and adolescence, but sometimes in adulthood as well, those hurt parts get stuck. So if you had, adverse childhood experiences, if you had a rough adolescence, there are parts of you without healing, without self-care, without self-compassion, those parts just stay stuck at that age they got hurt, they got beaten up. It's soul damage, right? We all have things like that in our life. And that means we all have buttons that get pushed and we become not totally rational or completely irrational. We regress We flash back. We're not totally present. We're not really hearing what people are telling us. Everybody has something like this, which is why another top 10 saying, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. So something here, Isaac, whether the present, which was horrible, or something about your past experience made you feel powerless in that moment. And only you can figure out if that's because you really were powerless in that moment, or because in that moment, something made you flash back to another time where you were powerless. Now, either way, you deserve better. You deserved better. You continue to deserve better. You always deserve better. No one deserves trauma. Okay? No one deserves trauma. But if you got trauma, what do you do about it? It's your problem now, right? Let's do something useful with it. Going forward, Isaac and everybody else listening, you need to reassure and comfort that hurt, stuck part of you. We're going to talk a lot more about this self-comfort techniques in future shows. And we're going to talk a bit more about it after the break, which we got to go to soon. But before we go to break, here's an exercise, all right? I expect this is going to come up a lot this hour. Take a deep breath. Hold it for 3. At least 4 seconds and hold for 3. So that 3 seconds of dead air was probably murder on the producer. I apologize, radio producer. Now, after you take that deep breath, Isaac, repeat, say to yourself, I deserve better. That's going to feel weird at first. But do it again. Take a deep breath. I deserve better. Every time you say it, it feels more real. It gets easier. You will feel at least somewhat calmer, somewhat more centered. So that's something you can do when you start feeling that stress at work. Go into the bathroom, go into a break room, something, and you don't have to say it out loud. Sometimes people find it more effective when you say it out loud, but you don't have to say it out loud. But that's the beginning of that journey to be more aware of your feelings, acknowledge them, validate them, and begin those self-compassion skills, that state of self-compassion where healthy self-esteem comes from. All right, we do have to go to a break now. More on this after the break. If you want to ask a question like Isaac did, Isaac, thank you so much. The number's 289-275-9600. That's 289-275-9600. Or you can email itsnottherapy@saga960am.ca. It's not therapy, no apostrophe, at saga960am.ca. Or Twitter and Instagram. You can tweet me. You can Insta me. Not Therapy Show. At Not Therapy Show. Everybody knows the at, right? Shouldn't assume. Not Therapy Show on Twitter and Instagram. All right, more about practical tips for positivity after the break. And I talked to a caller, but it won't be therapy because this is not therapy and I am not a therapist. I am Leanna Kersner on Saga 960 AM. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on Saga 960 AM. Who's we, you ask? I'm the only one here. I guess I went a little Moon Knight there. We are talking practical tips for positive thinking tonight. I am still Leanna Kersner. I am still not a therapist. You might have noticed. Before the break, when I was dealing with a listener question to a listener named Isaac, I deliberately said, you deserve better to him instead of it wasn't your fault. And this is because positive thinking is built on affirmative statements. And this is why. When you're feeling down on yourself, saying it's not my fault often doesn't help, can sometimes make you feel worse because your brain is in a place where it strips out the not. All it hears is my fault. I deserve better is an affirmative statement. So there's no way for your brain to strip out those parts. At first, your brain is still going to fight it when you say I deserve better, and your brain's going to go, no, I'm not. But keep repeating it. I deserve better. Eventually, it'll sink in. If you want to be more comic book, you can tell yourself something like, I am worthy. Personally, I can't do that without my Thor hammer. Yes, I own a plastic version of Mjolnir. Yes, I just admitted that on the radio. This is not surprising if you've been listening along. But no matter what the self-validating affirmative statement that feels more right for you, play around. I'm a good person might work. It might be something else. As long as it doesn't contain the word not. That was a double negative, I know, but avoid the word not. Affirmative statements, self-validating, so your brain can't strip out parts, okay? And we have a call. We have Aaron on the line. Aaron, thanks for calling. It's Not Therapy. What's your question?
I have a question about panic. Due to some unfortunate circumstances, I have to find a new living situation very quickly. And the faster the deadline approaches, the more I have trouble thinking about anything else. It's impacting my sleep. It's starting to impact my work. I have trouble really concentrating on anything else because I keep freaking out about what's going to happen if my condo deal doesn't close, if I can't get a mover, all that. How do I put the fear out of my mind, not panic, and live my day-to-day life until I know what's going to happen at the end of the month?
Yeah, that moving is one of the most stressful things anyone will ever go through. I don't care what anybody says, even when it's less of a tight deadline than it sounds like what you're going through right now. There's a certain extent to you are going to feel anxiety. The question is whether it becomes overwhelming for you, right?
Yeah, but how do I keep it from being overwhelming?
Well, I mean, there's two elements to this, Aaron. There's the physiological response, what your body's actually doing. And then there's the cognitive stuff, what your thoughts are saying, right? And the thing about panic is that it's a bit of both, right? There is still that everybody has a sort of baseline stress level, the amount of cortisol your brain likes to pump out, right? And so some people handle these situations better than others. So from that physiological response, nobody likes to hear this. Watching the caffeine, for one, helps stop your body from sort of cranking on its own. Making sure you do get enough sleep. Sleep aids short term are safe as long as you're not taking them, every night for a prolonged period of time. They don't get habit forming in the short term. And exercise is extremely important when you're trying to brush off panic. Now, the thought processes are a different story. So before I go on to that, Aaron, is the exercise, the diet, the lack of caffeine, all that stuff, sugar, what's your sugar? Is that something you think you can do? Is your diet fairly good?
I'd say it's decent.
Right.
Not too much sugar.
You're not living off of Red Bulls and sugar twists kind of thing?
My only caffeine is usually a can of Mountain Dew a day.
Okay. I mean, that is a lot of caffeine, but that's not, some people do 6 cups of coffee in a day. So you're all right.
I've never been that guy.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good. So it sounds like a lot of it is racing thoughts, what's going through your head. Oh my God. The sense of a lack of control over the circumstances. Yeah. Lack of control is a difficult thing to deal with. And one of the strategies that helps is getting a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. That's what I did when I moved, because I had to move. We had a lot of cats at the time. So even getting a hotel, if there was an overlap, wasn't an option because so many cats. And so figuring out a plan B, figuring out a plan C was a bit comforting, but there was still that anxiety there, right? And so you can strategize, you can do the stopping yourself when you catch yourself racing thoughts and go, I deserve better than this, because you have to keep your job. And, I deserve better than this kind of calms the mind. It's affirming. Okay. But this is where self-compassion comes in. One of my top 10 sayings, self-esteem can't exist without self-compassion. You are going to be stressed. And this is going to sound really counterintuitive. The more you try not to be stressed, the more stressed you're going to feel. Because now you're beating yourself up for not being calm. Does that make sense? Does that seem to apply to your situation?
It does, but that's a hard habit to break.
It is a hard habit to break. And that's why the I deserve better works, because it sounds so strange that going easier on yourself actually leads to better performance, but you're burning so much energy and so much thought processes beating up on yourself, trying to control feelings that are very human. And the more you deny your humanity, the more you invalidate the humanity, the scarier things get, right? Because you're basically convincing yourself that everything's going to be a disaster. Is that something of what's going on right now?
Well, I'm afraid it'll be a disaster. I don't want to spend a month living on my office couch and hoping my landlord doesn't catch me.
Right. I mean, that's not something that anybody wants to do. Obviously, it sounds like you're going to have, a roof over your head no matter what happens. So that's good. But yes, not ideal. And, worst, figuring out what the worst case scenario is and knowing what you're going to do about it. Sounds like you've already done that. But I want you to try to do when you start feeling really, really panicked, especially when you're at work. And that's really tough because it does happen. And that's the beginning of feeling calmer about it. Is this stuff does happen. This stuff bothers everyone. If you can let people know what's going on, sometimes it's not possible. Some people are in lines of work where you can't, confide in colleagues that way. It's not that sort of workplace. But when you catch yourself with racing thoughts, stop, take a deep breath, hold it for 3 seconds, let it out, and tell yourself, I deserve better.
Breathe in,
Repeat
breathe
that
out.
2 times. What's that?
Breathe in, breathe out.
Breathe
like
in.
I'm staring at a beautiful mountain.
Right, exactly. Anything you want to visualize, but it's that held breath at the top, something called a controlled pause that stops the hyperventilation. But make sure you say, I deserve better than feeling like this. And
I had a personal trainer who taught me to do that breathing.
yeah, oh, it's great for exercise. It's great for exercise. A lot of people think deep breathing is about the breath itself. The pauses actually help deep breathing become more effective. I learned to do it to stave off asthma attacks when I didn't have a puffer, and I found out, oh, this is actually a relaxation technique as well. It just gives it gives your lungs the feeling like you're floating a little bit, and that kind of calms the body down. The body can't ramp itself up into that panic mode if you're slowing your breathing down and making it more conscious. And some situations in life are things that you have to just get through. There's no way to win the situation, and waiting, moving, things like that. It's a unique sort of thing. There are going to be challenges. There always are. You get through them, because no matter what, life just doesn't stop, right? It may be a really easy experience if you're lucky. It may be a very difficult experience, but at the end of the day, you will get through it and you will move on with your life. And so the goal is, another one of my top 10 sayings, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Just be good with yourself and take care of yourself, and recognize that anyone in your situation would be extremely stressed here. And sometimes just getting through the waiting game is the big achievement. You can't tie your goals in this to outcomes because they're not totally within your control, right?
Sadly.
Right. That's the thing that makes it so hard. You can tie your goals to your own behavior. So things like knowing you do, have a checklist of things that you're going to do every day to make sure you're on top of it. You can control going through that checklist. You can also control making sure you're good to yourself. Like I said, eating right, exercising, taking care of yourself physically and mentally, and then just taking those breaks and doing the work to keep yourself not calm, because that's not realistic, but out of a full-blown panic. And if you do have a full-blown panic every once in a while, that's okay. These body responses, they're there for a reason. As long as you're not, in a situation at work where it's gonna, hurt you career-wise, it's okay to break down and scream into a pillow or something like that every so often at home. If it makes you feel better and helps you get through, do it, because your goal here is just getting through this period of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. You don't have to be the video game tank, the guy that just soaks damage all the time. Sometimes you can be the person kind of bouncing around, flip, the comic relief. Sometimes everybody loves the comic relief in an action movie. Sometimes that makes it a little easier to go easy on yourself when you're just going, I'm going to freak out. Sometimes you can't help. Sometimes you can't totally stave off the freak out. You can just decide where you're going to have it. And that's responsible to recognize that and give yourself that moment, because trying to just bottle it up is only going to make it worse and only going to make it come out at a time that it's really, really not ideal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Don't freak out in public. Mind the caffeine and breathe.
Right. And freak out in private if you have to, or around friends. Everybody freaks out sometimes. It is not a failure if you need that release, as long as it's in an appropriate time and place.
Yeah, I'll work on it, I guess.
Yeah. All right, Aaron. Thanks
so
much for your call. And
I have one other question.
Yes.
Who would win in a fight between Halo's Covenant and Star Trek's Federation?
Which version of Star Trek's Federation?
Ooh.
Because Captain Kirk will cheat. Everybody else, I think they got a problem with the Covenant.
I'm going to say Picard, though.
Oh, I think Picard would beat the Covenant.
Cool.
Just because Picard has experience with the Borg. I'm just biased towards Picard. So, Aaron, if you're going to have a cup of Earl Grey tea, make sure it's decaf. And thanks so much for your call.
Thank you. Bye.
When we come back on It's Not Therapy, I'm sure the nerd talk will continue. Apologies to people who aren't Trekkers out there. No, I'm not sorry. Captain Picard is awesome. Anyway, fight me. When we come back, we're going to talk to one of the most positive people I know. It's the interview coming up on It's Not Therapy. Saga 960 AM. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner. I'm still a Star Trek fan. I am still not a therapist. And it's time for the interview this week. I'm joined by a really good friend of mine who just happens to be a smart and motivating human being. I'm joined by Adam Hodgins, Director of Worship and Family Ministry at Hillside Church. And Adam is here to talk about positive thinking and motivating people, teens and adults, to make choices that are the best ones for them. Adam, thank you for coming on It's Not Therapy. It's great to have you here.
Well, it's exciting to be here. The show is great, and I'm happy and excited to be part of it.
As you can see, guys, Adam is a very, very positive person. Adam is one of the most positive people I know. And one of the things, I mean, Adam, you make it look easy, but being positive is a choice, a series of choices, right?
100%.
Yeah. So what's something that somebody can start right now to do to be a more positive thinker, be a more positive decision maker?
So I think really, if we're talking about the root of positive decisions and going down that road, it's a paradigm shift in your mind, right? The question really is where do you find your contentment and self-worth? And that's where joy and positivity can start from. Because if you don't think of yourself, or if you're in a place where you are not content, you're constantly in a state of like unrest and disillusion.
Yeah.
Our circumstances will dictate what I call our joy level. And I think that we live in a world that says if your circumstances are even a little bit less than you want, you have the right to be upset, and you have the right to be like loud and angry. And how based on circumstance is it? So I think the idea of having a positive outlook, it starts with understanding that circumstances are temporary.
Yeah.
And they can't dictate our demeanor. They can dictate our path in a day. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I mean, I repeat ad nauseum. I have my top 10 sayings for this program because I repeat them so often. And I always say healthy goals are based on things you can control. And that's based on exactly what you're saying, that if you let circumstances determine your outlook, well, the slightest thing is going to ruin your day. Right? What do you think about this statement that people have a completely wrong definition of what it means to be positive? And they're okay, just ignore the negatives, pretend they're not there. You can't be a more positive person if you just constantly sweep everything under the rug, right?
Right. And I think you were exactly on point, where it's not ignoring the negatives to be positive, but it shapes in how we react to positive or negative things. Right. So like if someone brings you a negative situation and you can easily get down in the mouth about that, or you can come at it in a positive way. I think if I remember, I think one of the first conversations we had online when we first started hanging out, I got in a terrible car accident, and we were supposed to do I think I was supposed to come to like a book club at like a nerd book club of some sort.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And I got in a car accident, rode off my car, and you were like, oh, that's so bad. And I was like, it's okay. I got a nice ride in an ambulance today, and I get to buy a new car now.
Yeah, that sounds like you.
And so it's just the idea of like any circumstance can be terrible, but there's always, you can look at things in a different light, right? My mom and I have the joke of when something really bad is happening, we're like, let me know when we can start joking about this, okay? Like you're the one who can tell me, but let me know when it's okay to start joking about this.
Yeah, that this will be a funny story later attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use that all the time.
And it doesn't mean you can't express dissatisfaction.
Right.
But you have to do that in a way that is like, we always hear at our church and our job, so like, how can we exit this situation with everybody being in a better place? Right? Like we had an issue with some kids with our son at the school, and as opposed to being a hothead and calling the principal, being like, here's what, and just blowing up, which all kinds of parents would do. We called and we said, like, here's an issue that's happening. We'd like to talk about this and figure out like a strategy. If there's a way that we can all come out ahead on this, like what's the best way? And that was hard for us to do at first, because you're very protective of your kids.
Of course. Right.
We want to say like, there's a bad thing happening here. That doesn't mean we need to make it worse by our attitude.
Right. As I say on this program all the time, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. And that's exactly what people tend to do when they go negative and they blow up. And what does that do? It may make you feel temporarily more powerful, but that's a lie, right? When you're losing your cool, you're not in control.
Going back to talking about like, how do we be positive in our changing social situations and the way technology is changing and how everything is different. The things that aren't different is people aren't different. we have the same problems today. Kids deal with the same things they deal with today, that they've always dealt with, that you and I dealt with when we were in public school, that our parents dealt with when we were. It's the same issues. I think the biggest difference, though, is if I said like, well, I think I'm right for X, Y, or Z reasons, right? Like if I said to you, let's take something ridiculous. If I said Leanna is insane because she doesn't think Tiger Tail is the best ice cream flavor. Like that's nonsense. Let's just use that as a base. I'm not trying to offend anybody here.
Tiger Tail ice. I don't think I've even ever had Tiger Tail ice cream.
It's
I know
a
what
combination
it is.
It's a combination of
Orange and licorice, right?
Yeah, it's awful. But let's pretend. Let's pretend you think it's the best thing in the world. And I was like, well, Leanna's insane because she thinks it's the best thing in the world. And I'm gonna like, I can go online right now and find somebody who agrees with me.
That's right.
Right. There's always, no matter how ridiculous your cause is, there's always somebody who will support you.
Right.
And if you can get one person somewhere to support you, then you're like, okay, well, then I'm justified. And all of a sudden, being angry is one thing, but when we have the perception of justifiably being angry,
yeah,
we do some really incredibly outrageous things.
Yeah, that
to other people.
Yeah, that humility is just not there, because it used to be that you actually had to talk it out because you couldn't go ask referee Google for something. And that's pride, right? That's just ego. That's not trying to understand another person.
No. And a couple of phrases that we use around here is that we want to remember that, like, hurting people hurt people.
Yeah.
So if you're in this situation, we try to often say, like, well, what led Adam to really rip Leanna apart because she likes Tiger Tail ice cream? Like, what was his day like? What was his experiences? Right. And where do you go from there?
Yeah.
But we often don't put ourselves in other people's shoes
because we're discouraged from doing it.
We're discouraged from doing it, and we live in a place in society, a time in history when, like, your opinion is right just based on the fact that you say it's right, which
is not comforting to me. I don't like that. Other people do. They need that certainty.
Right.
Because making a mistake and being a bad person are the same thing in a lot of people's minds.
You're right. The idea of, like, oh, I made a mistake. People get so scared of being caught making a mistake.
Yeah.
It's really, you lose some creativity.
And making mistakes, I believe anyway, is a learned skill, and people never learn it because they're taught to avoid mistakes and then cover them up when you make them, instead of learning how to make mistakes with grace. So what's your advice there?
Well, I think it's a learned thing. And I think we need to be, as people, it starts with one and learn behavior, and people imitate behavior. Mm-hmm. But I think just showing more grace. And I like to get excited about, if my kids make a mistake, we say, okay, that was a mistake, but, like, what did we learn from there? Where can we go from there? And what was the good stuff that happened in there? Mm-hmm. On top of my job, one of my other passions in life, and this, is I'm a vintage toy collector. Mm-hmm. I have a large vintage toy collection, and it's a lot of fun. But my son and I were in the toy aisle about a year ago, and he looked at me and he goes, "Dad, how come the toys in the aisle right now aren't as fun as the ones that you had when you were a kid? Mm-hmm. Why aren't they?" And I said, because toy companies aren't taking any risks anymore. They're scared of making mistakes. Mm-hmm. They see, here's what works on the spreadsheet. So we know that, like, these 3 lines sell and these characters sell. So we're going to keep making them. Back in our day, when they were just kind of like throwing stuff at the wall, yeah, there was a bunch of times that things didn't stick, but the stuff that stuck was, like, revolutionary and was incredible. And so I think we need to be okay with making some mistakes in the hopes of cracking the code of being incredible.
Right.
So anyways, yeah, I think the start of it, I think the road down there is just, if we get an idea of not being circumstance based, if we're not able to say, like, okay, my circumstance says I can do this or I can't do this, and just having grace and compassion when you see somebody trying something, as opposed to pointing at what's wrong, try and help. Right. Be part of the solution. Right. John McClane in Die Hard was a genius, that line when he says, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But people would rather stand around and point out what's wrong with somebody. Right. We have this, and again, they're funny and you watch them, but there's a whole industry based on videos of people failing at stuff.
Yeah.
Right. There's so many fail compilations, and granted, some of them are hilarious and you watch, but if you think about it, it is a little bit weird that there's an industry based on the world laughing at somebody.
Because they need to see misfortune from somebody else to feel better about themselves.
Right. Like that guy didn't land that kick flip or ramp jump. But I'm like, yeah, but you're sitting on your couch watching them. You're not trying anything yourself. So it's just an idea of like, we're training ourselves to laugh at people more and more.
Yeah.
And be less compassionate. So I think compassion is the first step. And I think, just practicing it and showing it. Yeah, that's what I think the keys of that. And again, not being like choosing to be content. Right.
Now you have a bad day.
Yeah.
How do you shake it off? You have a bad day. How do you start the next day with a positive attitude? Because that's another skill that takes practice, and people need that first step.
Yeah. And there are some times when like I will have a bad day and it'll turn into 2 or 3. Like there's some stuff that goes along. But it all comes back down to like you have to mentally like just choose, like, I'm not going to let that one instance dictate what goes on. There's been places that, or jobs that I've been in that haven't been let go. And there was like a lot of hurt involved in moving on. And then you say, okay, well, are you going to be defined by your hurt? And I think there's people that, I know for a fact, there's people that love to be defined by their hurt.
That's what people are encouraged to be these days.
Right. Like you'll meet somebody and say, hello, this is me. And this was wrong with me. These are the things that I suffer with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's an interesting way to introduce yourself. Right. And we look for sympathy wherever we can get it, it seems. And, I just, you make a decision that you're not going to do that. You're not going to let the hurt define you. And you have a choice. You can choose to be, because you can't control your circumstances. Yeah. Right? You can just control how you react to them.
That's right.
And again, there are some knee-jerk reactions that just make you very angry, that make you very sad, and that's okay. I think too, people are scared to say that our emotions are okay. And,
definitely. Yeah.
We have emotions for a reason. If you're feeling angry and upset about something, really look at why.
Yeah.
Right. And are you justifiably, if you're feeling really sad, that's okay. That doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're sad right now.
Yeah. And use your emotions as a guide, not as something to beat yourself up with.
Right.
There are more joyous ways to feel sad. There are more productive ways to be angry.
Yeah.
All right, Adam, thanks so much. We've been chatting with Adam Hodgins, the Director of Worship and Family Ministry at Hillside Church. It's in the Mount Albert area for anybody who's there. Adam, how can people find you mentioned your YouTube stuff?
So, well, first of all, our church is just Hillside Church, mountalbert.com. And if you go on the internet and YouTube and look up Go Figure, you'll see videos of me fixing old toys. So that's, that's where you would find it.
All right. So Go Figure is the way to get a hold of you.
There you go.
All right. We should have led with that. That should have been your credentials for this interview.
That's the hook.
All right. Now that's the hook. Now we're going to go to break on It's Not Therapy, Saga 960 AM. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on Saga 960 AM with a few minutes to spare. I'm Leanna Kersner. I am still not a therapist, and we're going to try to squeeze in one more question. This question is from Dave. Dave says, my daughters are 12 and rapidly approaching the age where they'll be exposed to media manipulation. How do I help them realize when they're being manipulated by the media and social media that they consume? Big question, Dave, but hopefully I'll have some answers for you. All right, let's break this down. Media can't override real life family and friends as long as you're engaging with your teen. And that's whether they're male or female. Boys need this too. Let's not neglect our boys. Instead of focusing on what you say to your teen, Focus on listening. Remember Leanna's top 10 sayings. Listen twice before you talk once. There's a reason I say this. Showing that you can listen shows that you can understand. And teenagers listen to people they think understand them, which means teenagers listen to people who listen to them. Makes sense when you put it like that, right? People in general listen to people who listen to them, and teens are people, even when they act like little monsters. So if you want to shield your teen from the harmful potential effects of social media or any media, be a better listener than that Twitch streamer that they like. Now, I might be that Twitch streamer, but you might not get so lucky, Dave. You might get someone else. And social media in general with teens is scary. It's harder than ever to monitor teens' media consumption as a parent. So being that sounding board that they come to first instead of absolute last is the way to make sure that you can insulate your teenager from anything they may encounter in the rest of the world. If you want to ask a question like Dave did, Dave, thanks for your question. Call 289-275-9600 or email itsnottherapy@saga960am. It's not therapy, no apostrophe, saga960am.ca. Or you can send me a tweet, an Insta. I love social media. I'm on social media a lot. Sorry, parents. Not Therapy Show. That's at Not Therapy Show. At Not Therapy Show on Twitter and Instagram. And we are out of time for another week. Next week, we are going to talk about post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. Yes, a subject near and dear to my heart. Until then, this has not been therapy. I am Leanna Kersner. Have a really great week. Be well, think well, tell yourself positive thoughts. Remember those affirmative statements. No knots in the positive self-talk. You deserve this. You are worthy. It gets better. And remember, one of my top 10 sayings that I like to close with, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. And you have got a deep dive into my crazy this week. Leanna Kersner, I am not a therapist. It's not therapy. Signing off for another week. Saga 960 AM.